So I have Larry Goldberg back today because about a week or so ago, he and I started this conversation about Asia, all of Asia, and we're throwing Australia in just for fun into that mix. And that Australia, Larry, has been a big part of your and my life. We're both children of the 40s.
Yeah.
Shh, don't tell anybody. And first it was Japan, then it was Taiwan, then it was Korea, then it was China, and now it's India and Vietnam. I mean, throughout our entire life, this part of the world has been dramatically increasing in power and economic influence, and basically going in many cases like South Korea, Japan, and Singapore, going from flat zero nothing bomb to oblivion to first world top countries in 50 to 70 years. It's been miraculous, and now China, they're calling it the miracle. So it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, and I think that the theme today has to be, has China passed its apogee? And if so, how rapid is the decline going to be? You and I spoke about how Japan was going to be the next great world leader and how it was going to surpass the United States, and then it kind of disappeared. Doesn't mean to say they didn't capture the US auto market just in passing, but certainly Japan suffers from, it suffered in the 80s from this extreme, property crisis, and it's never recovered. Japan runs very large deficits on an annual basis consistently, and it's kind of perhaps even showing the way of how we will be in 10 years or 20 years time. But Japan passed its apogee almost quietly, and I think we're seeing the same thing in China today. I listened to Brian quite carefully. You had Brian on a little bit earlier, and he comes from that part of the world, and his family in that part of the world has spent a lot of time in that part of the world. But from where I sit, I think China is in terrible, terrible trouble.
Hmm. And then Jeff Lutz, who was on yesterday, Jeff was a little more optimistic about China. He wasn't quite as pessimistic as Brian or you or possibly even me. I think even Brian, though, thought that China probably has at least 10 to 20 years left before the demographics really catch up with it and really begin to mess it up. But this property problem, destroying middle-class wealth, that seems to be more immediate.
Right. I don't think the demographic issue is immediate. Although, let me rephrase that. I think the demographic issue is immediate, but it doesn't play out in dramatic fashion. It plays out over time. But there's no doubt in my mind that the property problem is extreme. I was reminiscing the other day. In 2014, I sold my company to a public company, and I think about a year after the sale, I was invited to one of their summits, of the corporation, and I was asked to speak for 45 minutes, and I thought long and hard about what to speak about. And the theme is all about decision management, because my company was a decision management company. We wrote software for decision management, and I was focused that time on what was going on in China, because I felt very strongly about the Chinese property bubble. So I spoke for 45 minutes on the Chinese property bubble, much to the dismay, I think, of the Sapiens management. But this was, almost 10 years ago, 9 years ago. And I thought that the property bubble was imminent, that the collapse from the property bubble was imminent. What amazed me is how they managed to keep pumping this property bubble through various means continuously since then. And the problem with bubbles is that the longer you try and stave off the evil day of the collapse, the worse the collapse gets. So I'm very pessimistic. I think there's going to be a very, very significant deflation in China. And deflation is one of the hardest. I mean, we talk about inflation as being a very serious problem, but deflation is dramatically more serious. Maybe even an order of magnitude more serious than inflation. And the 30s proved just how difficult it is to get out of deflation. And we saw what happened to Germany, before with the great, inflation and then the terrible deflation that they went through. So, my parents were children of the Great Depression, and boy, it was a struggle, because they couldn't get out of that mindset that they had developed in growing up in that environment. So all of this to say, I really am very concerned about what's going to happen in China.
Now, on the flip side of that, we saw that Japan having their housing bubble burst, again, by demographics, really. I mean, essentially, they had ghost cities 10 years ago and still do. And they'll continue to have ghost cities because they're continuing to lose population. But they went through that. And even though they have struggled for the last 20 years, they are still doing okay. I mean, the individuals in Japan are doing fine. The country is doing fine. They may have some more issues coming up by not understanding what's happening with the BEV market, but because their auto market is such a big part of what they do. China having passed them now as the largest exporter of cars. But overall, if China went through the same thing as Japan, it wouldn't mean that the world would collapse. It might just mean that China would not continue on this 10, 15, 20% per year. They might have years where they might have negative growth, 2 or 3. This year, they're looking like they might only have 4 or 5% growth. What do you think?
It's not a good parallel. Okay. And for the very simple reason, Randy, that Japan had extremely even distribution of wealth compared to virtually any advanced country in the world. China does not. China has an enormous population that are living not that far above the breadline. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when you think about Japan and you think about a general or gradual reduction in net wealth, you're talking about some hardship, you're talking about some adjustment, but the adjustment came relatively easily for Japan because there was almost zero population living below the breadline, mm-hmm. or close to the breadline.
Right.
So it's a very different situation. You can't really, equilibrate the two. I think, China has huge social and political, I'd say, I won't call them problems, I would say dynamics. And that is really what brings about revolution. I that may be a too strong a word, but it may not be. And when those forces are unleashed, it becomes very difficult to judge what's going to happen. I mean, we saw what happened in Germany in the 30s. You know, it was a battle in the streets between the Communist Party and the Nazi Party. And the Nazi Party won largely because of, Hitler's political skill. But the socialists, communists on the ground were very, very strong. And it was a very tight battle, really, at the street level. The communists never succeeded in taking over the government or even taking power, or even threatening to take power. That was always the field for the right wing and the Nazis, because the government was very strongly oriented towards the army and towards the right wing. What can happen in China is really it's very, very difficult to make out, but the forces that are unleashed are very well understood, and the forces unleashed are poverty with huge deflation. It's really a bad mix, very bad mix.
Yeah. So and Brian also mentioned, he thought, is it probably unlikely that there would be any kind of uprising in China? Yeah, it's probably unlikely because of the power, the government power that they hold, and the ability to control the population through media, through lack of media, etc. But that there are, a billion folks, and so if a half a billion of them get excited, it would be.
Yeah, the Communist Party has an extraordinary reach into daily life and into every village and in every, town and every city. Extraordinary reach, and in this regard, they're very well equipped to deal with unrest. But in these circumstances, it's very difficult to tell what dynamics will be unleashed. And by that, I'm not so much an uprising in the streets or in the villages against the Communist Party. I mean, the dynamics within the Communist Party. Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody thinks that, it's one solid, mass, and they all support whoever's the, designated leader of the day. Not so much. Mao was able to get through any challenges to himself by fomenting a revolution himself.
Yeah.
So that was his, Deus ex machina. That was his way of, ending the problem. And so not either way, but the potential for damage to the country from uprising, or the damage to the country from schisms within the party due to the pressures of economics, both are potential issues. And then you raised, the question of, does this spur some sort of warlike, some attempt to foment a war by China in order to solve the problem? Well, it's a real possibility. You can't discount it at all. And who would the war be against? The natural enemy, or the natural opportunity, is to take Taiwan.
Right.
But that may have risks associated with it. So maybe it's India. These are very, very difficult, situations to predict any direction or any outcome. But it's not good.
But it's not good. Yes. So if let's take it back into the world of Tesla. So I asked Jeff Lutz. I said, Jeff, if you were going to make it, if you were the decision maker would you have done as Tesla has done, and now probably opening a facility in India, probably doing something with Indonesia, and then you've set up a sales office or a major sales hub in Malaysia? Would you be diverting or diversifying yourself out of China, or would you be growing your presence in China? Or and Jeff had his answer. What's your answer?
Both.
Both. Okay. So you're not afraid enough of the China situation that you wouldn't continue to grow in China.
Look, it's very easy to grow in China because the amount of capital you need is really minuscule. You know, the amount of capital absorbed by Tesla China was almost zero. It actually was zero. It was a negative amount of money because the Chinese financed it almost 100%, and they were able to take money out of that country, within a year and a half, which is truly amazing. And so I think it's money to nothing. So they're building, a mega factory, as they now call it. And they built a supercharger factory.
Mm-hmm.
I expect the factory to expand. I see Tesla China continuing to expand. What happens in the event of some disruption? I suspect that trade will continue absent, some all-out war. But, you can't assess that level of risk. Doesn't matter where you put your factory.
So in other words, in India, you could have Pakistan all of a sudden decide that they're just tired of this whole thing and just come on down into India with all guns blazing.
I mean, there could be a nuclear exchange there.
Yes. Both of them are nuked. Yep.
Yeah. So it's impossible to say. I mean, do you avoid expansion because of all possible risk? How do you assess that risk? What value do you place on it? I think as long as you establish a fairly well-considered diversification from a geographic and from a product and from perspective, I think you're in a good position. So, I would, if I were Tesla, I would be doing what they're doing.
Okay. Yep. All right. And do you like the India with the major factory as opposed to Indonesia?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Indonesia is a really good place to manufacture cars, and I can say that with confidence because so many of the major OEMs have established car factories there, in particular the Japanese. So there are several major Japanese factories in Indonesia. Toyota, I think, is it Honda? It's either Honda or Nissan. But there are major factories, car factories in Indonesia, and it's a growing market, and they have raw materials. So I don't think there's a negative about establishing in Indonesia. I think, Indonesia has some problems. There's still very spicy elections that take place. There are all kinds of possible risks in Indonesia, but I expect that Tesla will establish raw material plants in Indonesia. I would build my car factory in India.
Yeah.
And I would look to Indonesia for additional, manufacturing capacity. So I did want to mention that, it's more than possible that Indonesia could be used for an assembly plant where knockdown kits could be assembled. Whether that's, financially advantageous or not, I don't know. And so I haven't done the hard work of trying to understand import duties and which countries are better and so on and so forth. But I would go with India because I think the future there is enormous. The potential is, and the market is already there now. So yeah, that I would choose India over Indonesia, but with this stipulation, I just don't know Indonesia the way I know India.
Right.
And it's possible that influences my thinking.
So the conversation has, in looking at India, I think Brian mentioned, I think that possibly Jeff mentioned it as well, is that maybe we'd be looking at an even less expensive car, not the $25,000, not the car that we're going to make in Mexico, but rather maybe a smaller, even smaller car, or at least a less expensive in terms of its overall bill of materials, to where we can get the thing down to a $16,000, say, car.
Yeah, I think people are looking at the wrong thing when they talk about the under $25,000 car. It is a platform. Tesla are building a platform, and they're going to have many variants on that platform. And one variant is going to be well under 15,000, and another variant is going to be as high as 30,000. That's what I'm convinced of. So I think the way the car is designed, the way the platform is designed, and the way the vehicle is designed, and is that the platform will support several. Now, this is not unusual, and a lot of the manufacturers are talking about platforms. But when you look at the modular construction, or the target to build a modular construction vehicle, the opportunities are much greater in modular construction than they are, in the standard chassis type vehicle. So I don't disagree with that view, but I don't think there's going to be, this model and then another new model. I think that platform is going to stretch across, this whole range. Now, will there be a micro car, one of these tiny $5,000 vehicles? Elon has said, not on one occasion, but on many occasions, that he doesn't think they will be safe enough.
I see.
And that's the reason he won't do motorbikes.
Motorcycles. Yep.
So I think that under his leadership, the company will not go to that level. I think they'll want to stay to, a level where they can guarantee the safety under the normal safety tests or safety strictures.
Sure.
And I think that's where they will stay. There is no doubt there will be a very significant volume of vehicles at the $5,000 level in the third world. There's no doubt at all. I think that's the ideal area for Tesla to license in drivetrains and batteries and electronics and so on.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you can't be all things to all people. There's going to be plenty of opportunity out there for lots of other companies to do lots of other things. At this point, it doesn't appear that Tesla has any interest at all in buses. There's plenty of people doing electric buses. Would they ever get into that? Who knows? But certainly doesn't seem to be on the top. There wasn't even a picture of one in the master plan.
Vans. Vans would be a focus, and vans will do very well in the East, in the Far East. I think there's a very significant market for them.
But they haven't even also talked about one that I've mentioned over and over again, which is small trucks. The very small trucks. The $17,000, $16,000 pickup truck, which is, I had mentioned it at one point and got shot down as well. There's just not that many of them. And then somebody comes back and actually brings the numbers in. I think it was probably Brian White. it's a huge
It's a
business
very,
all over
very
the world.
large market,
Yes,
particularly in the Far East
right.
and the Middle East
South
and
America.
Africa.
Yeah.
And it's a very large market. But it's more than possible, I think, that a platform that we're talking about could
Yes.
support that, because
Yeah.
that's the right size for it.
I think so too. Yeah.
In South Africa, we call them buckies, and
Okay.
everybody and his
Lucky.
brother had a bucky. And if you didn't have a bucky, you could always borrow a bucky from a mate.
Yes. Right.
And it was everywhere and wherever you went. And today it's just, they're just as prolific. So throughout the third world, that's a very popular vehicle. And, that would definitely work well on the same platform as the small car that we're talking about, and so I think there's a real opportunity.
Okay. So since we're talking about Asia in general, let's switch our thinking just for a minute to Taiwan, because I happen to have a soft spot in my heart for Taiwan. I bought a lot of product out of Taiwan. I've made a lot of friends in Taiwan. I visited Taiwan and enjoyed my time there.
You didn't drive.
I'm sorry, I did not drive in Taiwan, but I did watch the driving in Taiwan from my hotel room at one point. I also got the very special frisk in Taiwan because I landed on the other side of the island in a military base, and so they are going to frisk you in a different way, never to be forgotten. So anyway, but if Taiwan, so the United States, maybe a little shift here in thinking. The United States, Janet Yellen said the other day, we are now going to shift our strategy. Well, she didn't actually say it was a shift. She says our strategy, as if it was something new, is to make sure that we have our supply chains strategically considered at all levels. And she even mentioned pharmaceuticals as a strategic supply chain. But, I think we've always been interested in making sure that our supply chains are strategically aligned. That doesn't mean that we've done a good job of it. But, going back to, world wars and whatnot, we made sure we had a car industry even into the 60s and 70s as Japan was taking over. There was a lot of talk about the necessity of maintaining a car industry. So we had a tank industry, et cetera. We've had conversations about the aerospace and the importance of Boeing. But now, okay, she's made a big deal about it. How does we know already? We've had conversations, and everybody pretty much in the Tesla world has had conversations about the raw materials out of China, but Taiwan has a strategic lever that I'm not sure that America will continue to be willing to allow. How does that impact Taiwan, or will Taiwan do just fine even if we start building lots and lots of great chips here in the United States?
It will take decades.
Decades,
okay. For us to develop the abilities that Taiwan have already in-house. For a couple of reasons. One is because the skill sets are really, really, really highly specialized. And the experience, counts a lot. When you're putting layers of material at the atomic level onto PC boards at an industrial scale, it takes a lot to achieve. Intel are not competitive to TSMC. Can you believe that? After all these years, can you credit that? So yeah, I think it's going to be awfully hard for us to build that skill set back. And I'm not an expert in the field. I do listen to a lot of experts. My sense tells me that we have layers of evolution to go through to build the skill sets back. I look at General Motors and Ford and Stellantis at these manufacturers, and I see them struggling. I mean, the quality of their vehicles.
Volkswagen.
And so when you start talking about semiconductors, but we're on that path. We're on that path,
and it's a smart path.
Yeah. I agree. And the Koreans are doing very well.
Right.
I mean, the Koreans are certainly able to
in the game. Yes.
Yeah, they're in the game. So, and they're building plants here. There's a huge Samsung plant being built as we speak. So I think we'll be able to replace it, but it's going to take a decade or two before we really reach that point. But isn't it terrible that we have to get to this point? And isn't it terrible that we make, that we just can't accept what Elon has done for manufacturing in this country? Yeah. He's broken every paradigm in reinstantiating, production capabilities that we've just lost the touch of. I mean, he took a plant that General Motors and Toyota, the great Toyota way and all that, they loused it up. And look what he's done with it. I mean, it's just staggering. That plant, until Tesla China plant, Shanghai plant actually superseded it, was the most productive auto plant in the world.
Right? Yeah. Right.
I mean,
yeah. And then, of course, to go further than that and to actually be a bully pulpit for manufacturing and talking to young people and saying manufacturing is a great career. And, hey, entrepreneurs, consider manufacturing as a possible way to go in your life, not just sitting in an office and doing stock trading and accounting. And then even saying, okay, we're going to bring processing, back into, mining and back into the United States and do it here. We can do it here. We just have to be so smart enough to know how to do it.
And Obama recognized it and he acknowledged it, but this president we have now just has this block. I mean, it's a political mindset, and it's just such a tragedy. It is just such a tragedy. Put the politics aside, focus on what has been done for this country in terms of, we've put this country back in the space race, in the ultimate leadership position. We put the country back in the leadership position of auto manufacturing, which has lost for 50 years.
Yeah.
But Mary Laird, what can I do? Mary Laird. I mean, I would fire that lady. She's been so bad for General Motors.
Don't sue Mary, but I'd fire you too. So sue me.
Oh, she can sue me. I'm happy to defend my
business. You're good. Okay. Larry, this has been great. I've really enjoyed this series that you and I started together. We will have you back on. I mean, no, actually, we're recording this on Friday. You were on last night. So if anybody didn't see last night's show where we talked about the week and how things went, this weird week that we're in. But we'll talk about that. We will have already talked about that last night. So maybe I'll put a card right here for that one as well, Larry. Okay, Larry, as always, phenomenal to have you on board. And this conversation, I think, was one that needed to be had. I hope that the community appreciated the depth with which we have been able to cover it. And we'll see you soon, I'm sure.
Thanks, Randy. Have a great weekend.
And thanks to all of you. This is Randy Kirk, and it's been great talking to you.
Click the link below to get your paperback, Kindle, or audiobook now.